Ambassador to Lebanon, Doروثي, welcome.
Thank you, Laya.
Lebanon has been witnessing a severe economic crisis, or I would say collapse, amid an intentional obstruction of a government formation. Who does the U.S. hold responsible and accountable for the obstruction?
If I could start with the first half of your question, which was really a statement referring to the financial crisis that the country is in, and just identify that and acknowledge it. It's something that was a topic of conversation when I was in Washington a little over a week ago. And I was received at very high levels from officials who care deeply about Lebanon, who are watching this downward spiral. And they want to make sure that the U.S. government and our like-minded partners are doing everything that we can do to work with our friends, the Lebanese people, to try to stop this from becoming a true collapse. Unfortunately, I detected more urgency when I was meeting with my bosses and colleagues in Washington than I sometimes feel here in Beirut, because it's just business as usual. So I don't know if there's one party that is deserving of the blame, but I can tell you there is a desperate need for a fully empowered government that is committed to and able to implement reforms to stop the bleed, to begin to stabilize the economy, and to help get the economy back on track so that Lebanese people can put food on their tables, so that they don't have to face the scarcity of food, medicine, fuel, electricity shortages.
I understand that we have more than one party to blame, but there's definitely the responsibility varies between one party and another. Who can we blame first?
That may be a question more for the Lebanese people than for me, but when I look at the situation, what I have said previously publicly is that now is the time to build a government, not to block a government. I think that's clear.
To block government.
Let's not block a government, exactly.
Okay, so when we talk about blocking the government, I cannot but ask about the blocking third. What's your position on that?
Well, here I would hearken back to the vision that President Macron articulated when he visited Lebanon in the immediate aftermath of the horrific August 4th blast at the port of Beirut last year. And he said what Lebanon really needs is a gouvernement de mission, a mission government that is focused on key tasks. And at that time, if I recall correctly, he articulated dealing with the aftermath of the blast, dealing with the COVID pandemic, and beginning to implement some of the key reforms that are needed to stabilize the economy, and resuming talks with the International Monetary Fund, the IMF. I would add to that, whatever empowered government you're able to get in place, they also need to prepare for the elections that are due to be held in less than a year.
The elections?
Well, I don't know what the motivation is for a blocking third. And I've heard denials that anyone is seeking a blocking third. And if that's the case, then, you know, wonderful. But when I did the math, it seemed to quite often add up to that magic number. And maybe my math is wrong. I've never been the best at maths. But to me, a blocking third would be inimical to that vision that President Macron articulated of a gouvernement de mission.
And have you mentioned that in front of those asking for a blocking third, or at least under the table? And by that I mention it's either a minister, former Minister Gibran Bassil, or President Michel Aoun.
I have mentioned very clearly that the United States views any notion of a blocking capacity as inimical to the kind of government that Lebanon needs at this time of crisis.
Okay, one fast question. How does the U.S. assess Michel Aoun's presidential term?
Oh, wow. You know, again, this is probably more of a question for the Lebanese people to assess. You know, I have dealt very much with His Excellency, the President, and it's my role to do so as an ambassador. He is the head of state of your government. But I will leave it to your people to assess his performance.
Okay. Many describe the relationship between the U.S. and the commander of Lebanon's armed forces, Joseph Aoun, as excellent. Does the U.S. see him as a presidential candidate, as a real one?
I deal with the commander of the army, General Joseph Aoun, in his current capacity. I really have no opinion on whether he would represent a suitable candidate, and nor should I. But he has been a good partner to us in his capacity as commander of the army, and I think it's very important the investment the United States has made in the Lebanese armed forces. You know, we call them the LAF. Affectionately, we love our acronyms in the United States. But we've invested $2 billion in the LAF over the last 10 years to help professionalize the Army. This is your national level institution that is protecting your country's sovereignty, security, stability, and we're proud of that investment. But I also understand, if I may take the question a step further, that many of the soldiers in the Army are really struggling during these tough economic times.
Exactly.
And so it is incumbent on us and other donors to see what we can do to help them weather this economic crisis.
From what you are saying exactly now, if I may ask, will the U.S. increase its assistance to the LAF amid this economic crisis, especially that Hezbollah Secretary General Hassan Nasrallah has repeatedly said and assured Hezbollah's ability to overcome this crisis?
Well, I can't speak to what Hezbollah may or may not be able to do, but the United States is proud of our partnership with the Lebanese Armed Forces. And indeed, we have announced that we are increasing our assistance. Let me lay out a couple ways that we're doing that. First of all, we announced that we're increasing by $15 million this year our assistance through the Foreign Military Financing Program through the State Department. So we're looking at $120 million in investment in our partners, largely in the form of equipment and training. But it also manifests itself in things like joint exercises, something we did a little over a month ago, also bringing in partner countries from the region. But that's not enough because, as I said, we look around, we see what's happening, and these soldiers are really struggling to put food on the table. They're struggling to get to and from their places of work. So when I was back in Washington, I was very entrepreneurial, speaking with all of my colleagues to see what authorities we have under U.S. law to try to help the LAF and the soldiers in particular. Some of the assistance we've already announced. For example, we provided reimbursements to the tune of $59 million, and it just hit the accounts this week for expenses that the LAF had incurred to really bolster border security, to help harden the border between Lebanon and Syria. It's critical, and there's much more work to be done. We also provided the LAF with $55 million worth of ammunition, and we built for them a safe warehouse to store this ammunition, because after what happened at the Beirout port, we didn't want there to be any kind of haphazard storage of what is effectively explosive material. So we have a very secure storage facility that we built for them. But that's $55 million of ammunition that they don't need to spend that $55 million. We can defray that expense, and then that frees up the Army to use that money in their budget to help meet the needs of their soldiers. And we're looking for other ways we can support them too, but that's at least a start.
And will it stick to the Lebanese armed forces, or will it also reach the people of Lebanon?
This assistance will benefit the soldiers and their families, I would say. But we're doing a lot to help the Lebanese people. And again, I have to talk about the commitment and the sense of urgency that my colleagues in Washington demonstrated when I briefed them on the dire economic conditions this country is facing. So, for example, my colleagues at the U.S. Agency for International Development, USAID, they were already preparing a sizable humanitarian assistance package. And we've been providing humanitarian assistance in Lebanon for over a decade now. But usually, a lot of that is directed towards refugees. Those have been the primary beneficiaries. And of course, we always try to include Lebanese in that as well. But for the first time, these USAID colleagues have put together a humanitarian package that is going to benefit several 100,000 really needy, those most in need among the Lebanese population themselves, those who are facing food insecurity. So I think that's really important. We are putting our money where our mouth is. We stand with the Lebanese people.
Is it because now you see the Lebanese people as refugees in their own country?
I think that is a description that, probably people could argue about. But I do see that kind of really dire need. People who have trouble putting food on the table. People who are unemployed. 60% of the population now is below the poverty line, and half of those are in extreme poverty. The runaway inflation, particularly in food prices, and then facing the uncertainty as they look to the future when we don't know how long the subsidized food and other prices will continue.
From here, I would like to ask, will this humanitarian assistance will come to Lebanon through the government, or how?
No, we do not provide our assistance through the government.
Because you don't trust the government?
Well, it's just in Lebanon, there are best practices that we follow. And I have talked, and many others have commented on the regrettable phenomenon, but it is endemic here, that you have a problem with corruption. So we use trusted partners, and we engage in vetting to make sure that at the end of the day, these are tax dollars from the United States people. So we owe it to them to make sure that the humanitarian assistance provide and the other forms of assistance we provide is provided in a transparent way, and it's provided to the beneficiaries who need it the most.
When we talk about the economic crisis, we cannot stick to food. We also talk about oil and gas. We talk about medications and many basic needs. What would be the US reaction seeing Iranian ships unloading fuel in Beirout's port?
That's really not a solution. The United States has stood with the people of Lebanon, and we will continue to stand with the people of Lebanon. But what Iran is looking for is some kind of satellite state that they can exploit to pursue their agenda. There are other alternatives to provide fuel and electricity for the Lebanese people. And I would start right here in Lebanon. If we could root out corruption from your energy and electricity sectors, half of the problem would be dealt with right there. And it has accumulated over the years. So there are much better solutions than turning to Iran.
One last question, if I may. When we talk about the assistance to the Lebanese armed forces, would the US oppose any assistance coming from Russia or China?
It's not a question of opposing, but the Lebanese armed forces know who their partner of choice is. And we have stood with them through thick and thin, and we're proud of that commitment. There's no substitute for what I think you have to consider the gold standard. But maybe there's one other area that we didn't discuss that I'd like to get into, and I regret that I didn't bring it up earlier, and that is the World Bank and the emergency social safety net.
There are so many question marks regarding that loan exactly and how it's been used in Lebanon or being used in Lebanon. Some are saying that it's no longer funds to help the Lebanese people, however, it's for the elections. Do you see it that way?
I don't at all. I've spoken with colleagues from the World Bank, and I know they strictly adhere to the highest standards of ethical conduct and procedures for loans and grants. And this is a package that I'm proud that the United States, as a board member of the World Bank, voted to approve. A lot of work has gone into it, but I must say I've been surprised to see in the media reports that it's almost dead on arrival. And I don't think that's the case. And if I may, I'd like to quote a famous American humorist, Mark Twain. He was once upon a time reported to be dead in the American media. And he was in Europe at the time, and he sent back a telegram. And he said something like, "Reports of my demise are greatly exaggerated." And I would suggest that maybe reports that this World Bank loan are dead on arrival are also greatly exaggerated. Just because there's a lot of work that remains to be done, let's not write it off. And based on the information that I got, the World Bank, because of these high standards of ethics, has two sets of conditions. One for any loan or program to go into effect or effectiveness, and another for the disbursement phase. So there are a series of conditions, and I won't go into them all because I'm no expert in all these things, but these conditions will need to be met. And there's been some progress, but not enough, and they're not negotiable. I understand that. But at the end of the day, $246 million is going to help provide for the basic needs of the most vulnerable among the Lebanese population. And I think it's really important that we all be seized with a sense of urgency to get that program activated.
Why would the deputies try to change part of the deal and exactly changing the third-party monitor and refusing a financial monitor?
Yeah, I'm not well positioned to comment on what their motivations were. I think that there's probably a very good intention in there somewhere, which is to make sure that the maximum amount of that $246 million goes to the people, the beneficiaries who really desperately need it. And I'm on board with that. But on the other hand, you can't shortchange some of the basics, whether it's putting together the list of beneficiaries in a way that meets the World Bank's requirements, and make sure that the assistance is not misused or misdirected, but also to have a robust monitoring and evaluation component. These are standards that they have to meet worldwide, and we, as one of the primary donors in the World Bank system, we're one of the ones insisting on that. So we have to focus on that. But I'm going to also, if I may, just hold up this report, which I'm actually still reading. I haven't gotten through it all. But this is the report that the World Bank put out, I don't know, a couple weeks ago, that identifies Lebanon as one of the top 3 economic man-made disasters in recent years. And so this is what we're up against. So I think we all need to do what needs to be done, put aside anything else, and just get this program approved.
Most importantly, we hope it's away from clientele.
Exactly.
That's the main issue. Ambassador to Lebanon, Doروثي Shea, thank you.
Thank you very much.
دكتور ناصر ياسين، بعد هذه المقابلة رح ندخل